Let's kick off. I want to welcome everyone to the webinar. My name is Eamon O'Neill. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Lemongrass, based in the UK. Now, as co-founder, obviously I've been working with Lemongrass since the start in 2008, and over the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, we've noticed a lot of trending towards SAP and cloud. We've helped customers migrate their workloads from various on-premise and on-cloud platforms to new target platforms on cloud. And during that time, we've helped customers navigate everything from the business case through to technical layer, through to the operating model and how they look after those systems on an ongoing basis. About 3 years ago, of course, SAP launched their version of Rise with SAP, which allows customers to run on SAP's cloud and on their solution as they move customers towards the new product strategy that they've been defining over the last few years. And that's created a lot of interest from SAP customers. And we're seeing some customers get excited about it. Some customers are still trying to understand completely what they're meant to do and how they're meant to adopt it. We certainly see some customers gravitate to it for commercial reasons. It helps reduce technical risk, simplifying the operating model, or even access to innovation, which SAP is prioritizing on Rise. Things such as AI, certain BTP capabilities, and I think we'll see more of that. And customers want to see, that they stay within the guardrails of SAP's product strategy. So today, what we're going to talk about is ultimately, what is Rise? How should you be trying to adopt it? What are some of the lessons we've seen? And how do you get started? Like, what's the smart next step to take to make sure you've got a fully informed decision around your move towards Rise? Joining with me, advertised, we had Henrik Wagner, but we have had a massive upgrade by bringing in the man himself, Tim Wintrip. Tim, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sorry for Henrik is much better looking, so sorry about that. But yeah, so Tim Wintrip, I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Lemongrass. So I spend most of my time talking to customers and prospects effectively. I also run our advisory board. And I would say the last few advisory board sessions we've run, Rise is the #1 topic that we discuss. I've been working, I'm based in California, although I'm originally a UK resident, don't hold that against me. And I've been working in the SAP ecosystem for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, and cloud before that. Yeah, that's me. And I would say, we're seeing a lot of interest across Rise for both our existing customers and new customers, and customers trying to figure out how to make the step and what are the full implications of that step. But I think, maybe a year or so ago, or a couple of years ago, I should say, Rise was something that, maybe customers weren't quite as engaged in. Now, I'd say it's like something which is fairly unanimous in terms of most customers are starting to think about their Rise journey. So that's me.
And as we know in enterprise, nothing gets done without a good business case. So that's usually where people need to start. Of course, work with SAP, you should be able to get pricing reasonably easily around what it looks to buy Rise. But what else do customers need to consider when they're trying to pull together this comprehensive business case for a move like Rise?
Yeah, so it's obviously the foundation of anything is having a business case, right? It's what makes the world go round. Obviously, I think first of all you got to think about what is it you're trying to achieve. So a lot of people, we talk about Rise. I think there's a lot of confusion as well around there's S4 and there's Rise. First of all, the two things are separate. So we see a lot of customers kind of looking at their S4 business case and the Rise business case. Now, there's clearly a linkage there. In terms of the way that you can basically buy S4 in terms of a subscription, versus a more classic perpetual software license. But they are not the same thing. So first of all, there's your S4, your move to S4, and potentially a business transformation, and a bunch of significant changes to potential operations through moving to S4. And then there's really looking at access to SAP capabilities in a cloud subscription model, which is RISE. And one of the sort of perhaps lesser known things is that there's quite a lot of ECC running on RISE. They call it Cloud ERP, PCE, Private Cloud Edition, but that is also another route to RISE. So do you want to go to S4 in one step? Do you want to go to S4 in 2 steps? So maybe move ECC into SAP's cloud, potentially get some commercial benefits of doing that, and then transform to S4. These are all things that need to be factored into the business case, and potentially multiple layers of the business case. Other things to think about, and we've seen customers really wrestle with, is obviously when you go down the RISE route, you end up with a SAP subscription, but you perhaps have been buying SAP titles, software elements, SKUs for the last decade or more, and those you may have many hundreds of different SAP products ultimately. Some of those products may be based on the number of users you have, some may be more on data volumes, some may be more on revenue. Understanding that license base as you go into that business case is very key. And potentially optimizing your software inventory ahead of any RISE negotiation is something that we see a lot of customers doing. So that'd be another thing to think about as part of the business case, is looking at what you have and all those relatively complex different collections of software elements that you have today, how they become unified under a subscription, but making sure going in with the correct amount of things at the beginning of the RISE agreement is key. Other things is to understand is things like potential funding options as well into the business case. So SAP will provide funding and offsets for your for the dual run elements. So perhaps you've got existing environments and then you move to RISE. So that's another thing to think about. And actually, perhaps lesser known, but the hyperscalers themselves, the cloud providers, they offer significant funding to move to RISE too. And there are things like your volume agreements with the different hyperscalers that could also need to be considered, because you may have made commitments to, let's say, AWS, for example. But if you move to RISE, that volume will then really go into a SAP subscription. So now there's ways to make that work and to offset those things, but these are all things that need to be considered, with some level of thought as key drivers for the business case. Of course, RISE, the RISE offering and really the consumption model from SAP, has a strong services element, that infrastructure management. So if you have if you have a team, if you have potentially, we've got customers that we work with that have multiple service providers in their organization that do elements of the stack. Some of those tasks will go away when you move to RISE, and it will become cleaner. But in that interim period, you have to make those changes. So maybe you certainly need to look at your existing cost base, your existing suppliers, the contracts you have, and whether they're whether you can effectively reduce them or back away from them as part of that. So understanding that operating model is probably one of the key drivers for the business case that you need to go down. And I think it's something that a lot of customers that we've worked with underestimate the change in that, both from how it affects their own resources and potentially their existing partner ecosystem and supplier ecosystem. Eamon, I know you were going to talk a little about operating model and what we've seen in a few examples.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. The whole move to cloud is about not just another platform. It's to really get the value out of it. You need to look at your operating model. Is the team organized to take advantage of the capabilities of cloud? And do you have gaps in your cloud? As you said, Tim, in some areas it's simpler. I mean, what SAP offer with RISE is the entire infrastructure management. It gets managed by them now. That's a huge part of any SAP landscape. Now, there is still a little bit around the periphery, around integration and integrating the RISE tenants back into your broader cloud infrastructure. But beyond that, all of the networking, the security, the infrastructure provisioning and maintenance all gets done. So in some ways, that's a really nice positive with RISE. So additionally, SAP take over a good chunk of the basis work. Now, what SAP have done is you need to draw a line between what SAP does and what they don't do. And this is something that some customers are not very clear on. What SAP have done, they released a matrix. You can see it on the website. It's roughly 1,600 lines long. And in that RACI, that matrix, they've got a list of all the services and who does them. In other words, will SAP do them, or would they expect the customer or one of the partners to do that work? So as you look at that matrix, that becomes a key tool to help define, who's going to pick up the bits that SAP aren't doing. And as you say, that absolutely contributes to the business case model as you pull it together. What we see though is another important factor of the operating model is not everything is going to go into RISE. So of course, you'd expect the ERP systems, some of the core transactional systems and reporting systems will, but you'll find in any sort of medium to large landscape, there'll be some product versions which SAP will say, look, it's not a standard product for RISE. So what we see a lot of customers do then is stand up a parallel set of accounts on whichever hyperscaler they prefer, and then migrate those systems into that parallel landscape. So then you have, we call it RISE Plus, where you've got the RISE landscape alongside the non-RISE landscape. So again, what does that look like in the end state model? That's going to be defined by what RISE will do and what it won't do. And then what we finally see is a bit of a wrapper around all of that. Rather than having different ways of working or managing those two different estates, we're seeing customers, they want one way, they want a partner to sort of put a wrapper around all the services and have a single way of interacting. So again, what does that look like? What services will that cover? What does that cost look like as you try to pull together this new operating model? What I would say as well is beyond the standard system administration that you'd expect to see with that type of landscape, the key areas of risk, but also responsibility that lie with the customer still remain security and finance. Those are things which every customer still will always own. You can't basically delegate that too far to any partner. So that means that you need to have people understand the RISE security model, the non-RISE security model, and similarly from a FinOps point of view, how do you manage spend on a RISE platform that can be variable, as well as spend which is variable on a non-RISE platform. So those are additional capabilities that might not be in place today that again you want to add to the mix of this new operating model and how it starts to form. And then as you start to paint that picture, one of the things that I find has become really interesting is that the operating model isn't just about the as is today. It's also about adding new capabilities. SAP has been very clear on things like PO going end of life and moving towards integration suite, things like BW integrating or even moving to DataSphere, even clean core, moving Z code from where it is today into BTP. All of those additional transformations are things that should be on a roadmap, either alongside or maybe after the move to RISE. So again, as part of this overall business case, it can become quite sophisticated, but I suppose it underlines the point that there's some really big opportunities here to get to a more streamlined, much more modern set of products with SAP, and take advantage of these cloud capabilities which they've been developing and releasing over the last number of years.
Yeah, I'd say one thing just, it links the business case, but obviously during especially if you're looking at S4, you're going to have an element of transformation running. So you'll have both, classic operations to support, what would be production, but you've also probably going to have multiple environments being built and handed over through effectively, this transition period. So the operating model for the end state may be different from the operating model for the project. And some of these bigger S4 projects that we see, they can be kind of multi-year events. So, as you do your business case, and as you plan out your operating model and your journey, you've got to think about that kind of that period in the middle where you may have your existing provider who has tribal knowledge, plus the workload and the requirements for that project phase could be quite heavy, and if they're not built into the model correctly, we've seen the numbers of, as an example, system refreshes you might need to do, or perhaps existing environments you may not need them for the whole term of the contract with RISE, but you may need them for part of it. And then you need to be thinking about how you structure your contracts, because if there are things in the contract from day one, chances are they're going to be in the contract for the duration. Whereas if you do things, if you structure the contract such that these maybe additional environments are there more transitionally, then you won't have that longer term commitment. So there's some things you can do to again improve the business case. And I would say definitely consider that period where you may have your existing provider, your existing environments, the new S4, if it's S4, new S4 world going on with a different operation model, and having that, having a solid understanding of how that's all going to work. It should definitely take some careful planning, should we say?
Yeah, and I think that's where we're seeing customers are looking for a bit of help to help pull this together into a structure that is explainable to the rest of the team, but is comprehensive and gives them a really clear picture of, as you say, not just the end state, but the interim states that you may need to navigate as part of your transition. So I suppose that brings us to one of the key areas, which of course is migrating. And there are, of course, different products here. There's different migration techniques. Like what have you seen so far customers asking for? What are the scenarios that have been popping up, and what are the takeaways that listeners today could be thinking about?
Yeah, I think obviously there's different ways to get to RISE, depending on whether you're moving to S4 and the flavor of the move to S4, greenfield and brownfield and various different types of fields, and the extent of what we call internally the friends of SAP, but there's the ecosystem around SAP, and even things that you might think would be very, or even SAP elements that just aren't supported necessarily within RISE today. So one of the things that we've seen is the need for, the chances are you're going to have a multi-party migration event going on, because SAP services can do a lot of the migration work. But if there are additional elements there, then it may not make sense for SAP to migrate them if they're not SAP related. So one thing you probably need to think about is a multi-party migration, which then requires some level of overall all program governance. And there's obviously some details around who can do what, which I think often is not fully understood by the customer. So the ability for classic, including us, classic service providers to do migration work the way that we would do it more natively in hyperscaler cloud is a little bit more limited, right? So the way that the migrations might run might be slightly different. So it's not, if you have a service provider today that's telling you how they can do the migration, and perhaps they're talking about the way that they would do any other migration, it's different going into RISE. The idea of having a staging environment potentially, which we move the clients to, and then SAP pick it and take it and carry it across, is a little bit different. But saying that, there are a lot of the migration patterns that we would use, for instance. There is lots of similarity there, but there's a close linkage between the migration party and the SAP RISE team. So ECS is the team inside of SAP, and there needs to be close coordination and handoff between the migration parties. It's just something that needs it's not exactly the same as migrating per native, basically. So yeah, those are some of the things to think about. But again, I would say that the thing to take a step back on is it's not just moving to RISE. Typically, there's plenty of friends of SAP and key systems around SAP, and potentially tooling that you may have on your existing environment today that maybe you won't have inside of RISE. All those things need to be considered as you make this move. So that's,
and I think the thing you mentioned earlier as well, is certainly maybe not that well known, but is, I think, very helpful for some customers who aren't on the S4 yet. They're on ECC. For them, an S4 project might be a multi-year event in itself, and that might slow down the RISE adoption. Whereas, as you said, part of the migration strategy might be ECC to ECC. Get everything operating model up and running around that, and then do a second step to S4. Are you seeing a lot of that in the market today? I mean, is that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We've had clients, meetings recently with clients and actually SAP, and there is a very high contingent of migrations where it's a sort of two-step, or I don't think it's necessarily a two-step. It's an and step. So migrate ECC and re-platform it in that process to something more current. So I'm talking about taking it from, we've got clients that were on the likes of AIX and Oracle, and migrating them into RISE on Unix and HANA, right? At perhaps a later version, and getting that environment into a good state of health and potentially supported longer by SAP, right? Because it's running in their world and they put their arms around it, and they're doing an S4 kind of greenfield initiative, which might take a number of years in parallel to that, and that's also potentially useful for customers who are working on effectively a commercial structure with SAP, because that move to their cloud platform ultimately creates a revenue stream that allows them to be to perhaps give potentially incentives, if you like, towards the S4 work, and potentially moving to cloud will speed up that S4 journey, because we're a great believer in, once a workload is on cloud, you could be more agile, you can spin things up quicker, you can move things quicker. So we definitely see sort of the two-step with moving ECC to, say, Suite on HANA on RISE, and in parallel to that, either a secondary step or a parallel step moving to S4 as being a very common pattern that we see across the customer base. And we've seen customers leverage the business case and the benefits case of moving ECC quickly, because it creates effectively savings, which allows them to recycle those savings into their S4 initiative. So that's something that we see quite a bit of.
Cool. Okay, look, we've only got 30 minutes today, unfortunately, so we're kind of rushing it a little bit. But anybody listening, if you have any questions, there is a question tab in the webinar control panel, so feel free to pop those in. I'll just have a look at a couple have come through. So if we just try to answer a couple of questions. One here, with RISE with SAP, how is the responsibility for system maintenance and future upgrades handled? Will SAP take care of everything, or are there ongoing tasks required from our internal IT team? Well, let me answer that one first, Tim, and you can jump in if you like. But so SAP will absolutely help you with that, but of course there are a number of things they won't do, like testing, for example. So they'll help with the technical steps of the upgrade. There is a very clear RACI, as I mentioned earlier, which spells out what the SAP team will do versus what they expect the customer or partner to do. So it's not going to be seamless in that the upgrades get pushed by themselves, but they will be planned, and they will be SAP will work with the internal team or your partner to schedule and execute those upgrades. Probably worth differentiating at this point. We're talking about Rise. There is another version called Grow, which is effectively, if you like, a version of Cloud ERP without any modifications that might disrupt an upgrade. And in that scenario, SAP will be pushing upgrades seamlessly into your Grow system. But for Rise itself, considered private cloud, that is done hand in hand with the internal team. So hopefully that's clear. Second question, maybe Tim, you could pick this up, is what do you see are the most common mistakes made when moving to Rise?
I think the devil is in the detail of the contracts, is what I'm hearing from some of our customers. So, not necessarily understanding the specifics about what isn't supported in Rise, and that's probably not really on SAP. I think that's people perhaps not paying quite enough attention to the probably very boring 30-odd 40-page contract or longer, and that sort of 1,600 line roles and responsibilities matrix, and understanding exactly what they need. Those would be, and understanding the impacts to their organizational structure and potentially partners. Those would definitely be some feedback we've had. In fact, I was just with a client today, and I think one of the takeaways around it was they really wanted to, I think, doing the planning up front and understanding, what does the business case look like? What's that future operating model look like? Devil in the detail around things like how certain types of service requests are going to be fulfilled. The customizations that they've perhaps spent potentially many years, and these are potential technical customizations with, maybe they've done it with AWS, really optimizing their environment when it moves across, making sure that some of those things are carried across in the move. Some of those finite details would be other lessons learned that we've seen other clients perhaps struggle with a little bit in the move. So those would be a couple of things top of mind that I would think about, Eamon.
Yeah, that's it makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I was just looking at the next question, was how do customers get ready for Rise with SAP? And I think that might lead in, actually, Tiffany, if you could throw up the discovery workshop. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is just covering some of the topics we've covered today, but trying to take a first step towards this. We do this Cloud Discovery Workshop, which allows customers to really get a sense of some of this detail. This is a great first step for customers who are on the way to Rise or want to get on the way to Rise. Anybody in the audience today, just obviously take a quick photo of that QR code. It'll send an email to Tim and his talented team of business development guys who'll be happy to get in touch. But for now, what I'll say is, again, Tim, thanks for your time. Again, it was only 30 minutes, so we can only pick your brain briefly. But again, the offer's there to anyone who wants to follow up, please reach out. And beyond that, thanks for your time, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.